Yeah, I didn't know that you actually owned a mushroom farm.
Yeah, yeah.
How did that all start?
Well, I was really into wildcrafting, when I was younger, and just picking chanterelles, selling to restaurants, and then bought some mycology books, David Aurora's book, Demystified, and oh, we turn that off. And started learning more about wild mushrooms, and then years later was working on an organic farm, and they were cultivating shiitake mushrooms on logs, and I was like, wow, that's really cool. How neat would that be to grow your own mushrooms? And then started reading books and went to a conference and saw Paul Stamets speak at the Bioneers conference in 1999 or something. I was just amazed with his whole production, medicinal mushrooms, microremediation, tinctures. Let me turn this phone off.
No problem.
Let me turn this ringer off.
And so how long have you been doing this? I mean, just working with mushrooms and foraging for them.
Yeah, Fungi Farm. We officially had kind of launched in 2011.
Okay.
Yeah. And got our laboratory going. Our first goals was to produce spawn and, eventually for ourselves to produce, mushroom production, but also to sell spawn to homeowners and commercial growers and backyard growers and teach workshops. So we kind of focused on grain spawn and plug spawn, which is basically just the substrate to transfer the mycelium onto its next host, its next home. And so we do little dowels with little furniture dowels that we grow mycelium on, and then we drill holes and plug logs, and we grow organic wheat berries. We buy organic wheat berries and grow mycelium on it. And then that can be transferred onto sawdust or onto straw and grow mushrooms on the sawdust and straw.
So I got to stop you there. You're talking to a layperson. I have no idea what mycelium is, what any of that really entails. Yeah. So can you walk me through that kind of process of what goes into it?
You bet. So you have this organism, this fungal organism, and mostly what everybody's familiar with is what's called the fruiting bodies, which is equated to like the apple on the tree. That's okay. That's the fruit of this organism. The large organism itself is either living in the substrate, like in a rotting tree, or in the ground, communicating with trees, and trading nutrients through a symbiotic relationship with trees. And so you have two basic, families that most people are familiar with, and that's mycorrhizal fungi that is like chanterelles and matsutakis and hedgehogs, and those grow like in that symbiotic relationship. So they trade nutrients, a lot of times like minerals and things, with the tree in exchange for sugars, for carbohydrates. And so they work out this whole like stock market exchange. We're still learning a lot about this process, but they basically, the tree becomes this symbiotic give and take, quid pro quo, for this fungal organism, and they fuse their mycelium, which is the vegetative part of the fungus, which is this cobwebby, often white, thready little hyphae that fuse together with the roots. In this mycorrhizal scenario, they actually wrap around the roots and actually enter into the root cell, and they exchange nutrients. So when you do that, and a tree has roots that go out, 15 feet or something, and then you have mycelium going out another 15 feet and connecting to other mycelium that goes out another 15 feet that connects to other trees, and you end up with this underground internet network that is looking more and more like this really interesting sort of like stock exchange, where people put things up for sale and say, hey, I have a lot of carbohydrates. One tree's really doing really well with its photosynthesis. It's cranking up lots of sugars. And it says, who wants to exchange for some minerals? And then this fungal network over here is like, I want to exchange, I'll exchange. I have a lot, I can get you a bunch of minerals. And so they'll retain water, they'll exchange nutrients, and they basically become this interconnected network of the whole forest, right?
Okay.
And then in the case of sapphiritic fungi, like most of the things that we cultivate, oyster mushrooms, shiitake mushrooms, lion's mane, maitake, nameko, they're just wood digesters. So they secrete enzymes and they break down lignins and cellulose to extract the sugars. And so it's a much more simplistic process that we can mimic by taking the mycelium and giving it some cellulose to eat.
And that's where the dowels and the sawdust and stuff come in.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is it just easier to grow those types of mushrooms? Is that why you don't really see the other type grown, is because you need almost like a living organism to supplement it with?
So the one example we have is commercially cultivated, and only because it's worth, $1,000 a pound, is the Italian truffles. And those have now made it over to the US and are being commercially cultivated. Supposedly there's a spot in California and Oregon and somewhere in the Southeast in the United States. And they literally inoculate baby hazelnut trees with the mycorrhizal fungi of the truffle, specifically the Italian truffle. We do have native truffles here, but the European truffles is much more highly prized and supposedly more aromatic, and that's what the chefs want, right? And our truffles over here can fetch, $80 a pound, $100 a pound, and those truffles over there can fetch, $800 a pound, $1,000 a pound. And so those hazelnut seedlings are planted out in orchards, and it takes like 15 years for them to wait for the trees to mature, the truffles to grow, and then they train little dogs to go sniff the truffles out.
Oh, wow. So you're in it for the long haul at that point.
Right. These places are like, no one even knows the location of these truffle farms. It's like top secret,
Oh, wow.
And it's really interesting because it's kind of looking like it might kind of be like the wine of,
I was just thinking that wine. Yeah.
Napa Valley, how California was like, we have wine, and, Italy and Spain. And they were like, push, oh gosh, who's going to want to drink that? This is where the champagne is grown. This is where the Zinfandel is grown. And now California's boom, it's on the map. It's like people recognize. Yeah, so good quality wine.
What is the difference between just a mushroom and a truffle?
Right. So truffles are really interesting. Noah, a mycologist that comes up here in the area, he wrote the Mushrooms of the Redwood Coast. What's his last name? And he just did a great Noah Siegel. This is a book he did with Christian Schwartz. It's just like the best book we have now for Mushrooms of the Redwood Coast that we have from Oregon to the Bay Area. It's like our bioregion of the redwoods, the coastal redwood mushrooms, so it's just like the most up-to-date, accurate book. He just did a great talk on the Humboldt Bay Mycological Society's Myco Blitz week. Instead of, the usual fair, we had the online, virtual mushroom fair. And he just did a great talk about truffles. So it's a real new field for me. I don't know that much about it, but what seems to happen is these mushrooms that often did create above ground fruiting bodies, due to climate and weather and just adaptability, started, producing these underground fruiting bodies that were getting dug up and eaten by rodents and dispersed, and their spores were getting dispersed, often by little pieces getting dropped, and the spores' ability to live through the GI tracts of squirrels decided over, thousands and thousands of years, why push up above ground where it's hot and dry and wet, and things step on me and animals eat me, and my fruiting bodies get damaged before I mature. These truffles adapted to this mammalian relationship of little squirrels and rodents and humans too, digging these up and eating them and spreading them around. And so that became its spore dispersal instead of producing a fruiting body by pushing it up out of the ground and then dispersing its spores that way. So it's really trippy. I mean, this presentation you did, you can see mushrooms that are like inverting back into like going to a truffle. Like they still kind of look like a mushroom, but then they just don't come out of the ground anymore.
Huh. So it was like an evolutionary advantage.
Yeah.
To fend off predators.
Yeah. And really and fires and droughts and and all these and floods and animals stepping on you before you can mature and disperse your spores, so really, really interesting. New Zealand has some really bizarre fungal bird relationships where they've adapted to be eaten by all the because they have they don't have a lot of land predators, so they have all these ground birds there, and so all these mushrooms have turned into things that look like berries and look like food, that are just tiny little almost truffle-like mushrooms that don't even grow into full fruiting bodies anymore, that the birds eat, and it passes through the bird's GI tract and disperses the spores that way. So
it's incredible how different types of fungus have adapted methods like that, right, to spread their spores. I mean, you have that, I can't think of the scientific name for it, but it's like coined the zombie fungus,
right?
And it spreads its spores, and if an ant hits it, it kind of takes over the ant's nervous system and can control the ant and tries to walk it back to its colony so that it can infect the whole colony. And if ants, they can kind of sense, I think through pheromones, that one of their ants is infected, and they'll move it farther away from the colony so that the rest of the colony is protected. I mean, that's incredible that they can do that.
Yeah, that you would adapt to attack something's nervous system, but not kill it right away, to drive it crazy enough to either, go back to the colony, or some bugs will climb really high up trees, that higher than they usually go, and which is a great spore dispersal spot, and then clamp onto the tree, and then the mushroom will fruit out of the insect. And cordyceps are one of the big families. All
in the name of reproduction and trying to spread yourself as far as you can.
Yes. You just hope they don't take liking to us like that or something.
Yeah, right. Well, that's have you heard about the theory regarding like our body temperature and how 98.6, it's the perfect temperature to fend off fungus, and yet we're not burning too many calories in keeping ourselves that warm?
Yes.
I mean, it's insane when you think about that, and how global warming and the warming temperatures, and you have fungus that are adapting to these warmer temperatures, and what that could mean if you extrapolate it to us, you know?
Yeah. And what that means over eons and eons, when you really look and understand that some of the most advanced life forms very early on were these fungal colonies. And so to get in a relationship, to either not become a host or to eat them as food or whatever, quickly became dependent upon your relationship with fungus, whether you were a tree, whether you were, an insect or a mammal, and how it drove evolution, through time and developed ecosystems.
Mm-hmm. Well, they think that's why mammals thrived after the asteroids that wiped out the dinosaurs, right? One theory is that the asteroid hit, and as a result of all these decomposing bodies, fungus thrived, and it was everywhere. And because of mammals' body temperatures, they were able to come out and kind of thrive in that environment, because the fungus wouldn't hurt us like it would a reptile, where it could, or an ant, or these different organisms.
Yeah. And of course, there's parasitic fungi that, attack trees and attack reptiles and, cause infections in humans and, and just like viruses and the virus we're dealing with right now. But more often than not, what you see is sort of this with those type of, fungi and viruses and things, you see this sort of wolf in the ecosystem where, of course, there's honey mushrooms, Amalaria that attacks trees. But when you go in a healthy ecosystem, it's not killing the forest. It's just over here on this one tree. Mm-hmm. But when you tree farm, tons of trees, and they're stressed from drought, and you have insect attacks and you have fungal attacks. And then you hear about, the fear that the forest industry has of this parasitic fungus. And you're like, well, that's existed forever. And it wasn't wiping out forests on the planet, just like viruses weren't like wiping out mammals. It was just kind of keeps them in check, so to speak, when populations rise up, when ecosystems get damaged. And so a lot of these things, especially like sapphiritic fungi, when you step back and look at take a bird's eye view of the ecosystem, and you see that, say, for instance, to use oyster mushrooms as a common mushroom, what is it striving to do in this ecosystem? And it's breaking down these cellulose and lignin walls of this wood faster than just about anything else on the planet can, turning it into mulch, and effectively then bacteria and other fungi turning it into, and insects and vertebrates turning it into soil. And that soil is feeding those trees, which is growing more food for the fungus, the oyster mushrooms, And so you see the motivation and the intention that these organisms have to create diversity and to create ecological balance and equilibrium in the systems. And which is also just as amazing when you look at the ability of oyster mushroom to break down hydrocarbons. Like, how did that come about? The ability to molecularly disassemble chemicals and really complex compounds to dissolve it. You could simply just say, oh, it just wanted to get the carbohydrates out of that wood. It just wanted to get the carbohydrates out of that hydrocarbon. And sure, that's a simplistic way to look at it. But again, taking that bird's eye view and looking at the big picture, and you say, well, the more toxins you can break down in the environment, the more wood you can break down in the environment, the more soil and biodiversity you create, you're going to grow more trees. And the more trees that fall and start and become food for the fungus, the more the fungus can thrive, So there's an intention there that I think is really important to look at.
I had no idea that they were able to break down hydrocarbons. I've never heard of that before. Yeah. Is that a fairly recent discovery, or has that been known for a long time?
It's been pretty prevalent, for the last like 20 years or so. There's been a lot of great research. Of course, people, known that even longer and have tested it, but there's been some really good research books that, have come out in the last, 15, 20, maybe even 30 years. And just looking at the ability of different yeasts and molds and, and fungi and what they can do to break down different compounds of, specifically like man-made chemicals. Mm-hmm. And so, again, it's a fascinating phenomenon that it can even do that. Of course, oyster mushrooms aren't looking for hydrocarbons. They're not flying, sporulating around the world looking for hydrocarbons, but it's really interesting to think about what oil is, what petroleum, the base of petroleum is. It is rotten organic matter, if you go back far enough, right?
Yeah.
Compressed in the earth and, all that, chemistry that happens, but still just on a basic level. And so when I was researching this and kind of looking at hydrocarbon molecules and looking at lignin molecules, you're like, wow, I can see how this isn't that far off for something as powerful as a oyster mushroom, mycelium's enzymes. These enzymes they produce are really, really strong. That, these peroxidases, they basically, they basically dissolve the substrate as the hyphae excretes this, and then is able to eat the substrate as it runs through. So, the fact that, like I said, oyster mushroom's not looking to find an oil field to eat, but it's more than willing to do that, if you can create the right environment and create a nice, hospitable, moisture and temperature and humidity and everything for that mycelium to grow, it will gladly tear those hydrocarbons down to base salts and release the gases and eat those sugars right out of the hydrocarbon.
Are there any efforts to try to, I don't know, capitalize on that, in the sense of like these oil spills you hear about that happen fairly frequently? That seems like a great environmental way to try to clean it up and have minimal impact.
Definitely. We've assisted in a couple projects around Humboldt County. One that we did, the reports on our website, fungifarm.com. Out in Orleans, the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council recently took ownership of this building back in 2011, right downtown in Orleans in northeast Humboldt County. And behind the building was a backup generator and a diesel fuel storage tank that had been leaking for years and had caused the ground to become saturated with diesel fuel. And so that fuel was excavated and layered with that contaminated soil, was layered with mycelium that we grew for them, through, sort of like a lasagna compost pile, through, with the soil, and treated, and that, with the oyster mycelium to break the hydrocarbons down, and they were able to not have to dispose of the soil, which is unfortunately like often the cheapest default method that people do, is just to take the soil and put it in a Class B lined landfill. In this case, down south or over east in Redding. We don't even, have a landfill anymore in Humboldt County. But again, you're burying these hydrocarbons in this, extremely anaerobic environment in the ground,
which doesn't solve anything.
Biology can't get to.
Yeah.
And it's our, capitalistic culture that thinks we're throwing something away when there is no away. That's just somebody else's watershed, and you can pretty much put a ticking time bomb on when that'll end up in their water system. Maybe it's 200 years, maybe it's 2,000 years, but that's not going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And another beautiful thing about the project was that it was Karuk tribal land and ancestral land right there, and they needed to monitor the soil disturbance of that area. It was right next to the Klamath River, and that soil would have had to been sifted through for archaeologically significant area. That soil would have had to been sifted through for artifacts, and so it wasn't even really a great option to throw it away. So to get back to answering your question, so, there are other remediation techniques where they, steam the soil, ozonate the soil, expose the soil to air, sunlight, let the chemicals break down that way. There's solvent, there's that they can pour in that are kind of like what the mycelium produces. Some of them, they dissolve the chemicals and will help them break down, and then allow nature to then do its magic and break it down enough to be non-toxic for the site. A lot of times they pour concrete over it and just cap it. That's another like legal method. If it's not leaching into groundwater or whatever, they'll case it with concrete, seal it. depends on the location and where it's at. So, it's to answer your question about why isn't it done more? Why isn't it capitalized on? There is a couple companies that have patented this technology. So that's one of the, roadblocks. There's also the mindset that we have that everything's going to be really fast, and digging it up and hauling it away is really fast. Our project out in Orleans and another project we did for a local landowner, she wanted to remediate some motor oil that had spilt on our property. Both these projects took 2 years to complete, and so, a lot of times people propose, soil removal or solvents or whatever that are supposed to treat the problem faster. Not necessarily cheaper. It's sort of like clean energy. As the price of fossil fuels go up, the price of solar panels come down, we see more, clean energy being produced, right? It's the same thing with, ecological methods like this. The higher cost for landfill disposal, removal, hazardous waste permits, all that stuff starts driving the technology for people to look for other answers. Landfills filling up and closing down, and people not wanting to build more landfills. So these are things that I think will drive the need for more on-site biological solutions.
What are the byproducts that the fungi are releasing, in this case, as they're breaking down the oil and stuff?
Well, one of the misconceptions I should probably clarify too is when we talk about fungal remediation, we're primarily in this instance with the hydrocarbons, we're talking about just growing mycelium. There's no fruiting bodies. Again, the mushroom itself, the fruiting body you see, the portobello you buy at the store is the fruiting body. We're not fruiting oyster mushrooms in most cases. So when the mycelium comes in contact with the hydrocarbons, they're doing the same thing they're doing to the lignins in the wood. The hyphae secretes the enzymes. The enzymes slowly start dissolving the hydrocarbon molecules, and they want to get that sugar out of there, just like they want to get that sugar, that carbohydrate out of the lignins in the wood. They want to get that carbohydrate out. So what you end up is there's gases that are produced. There's water, obviously, in oil, and there's salts. And so when all said and done, you're back to these base minerals in the soil, gases that have been released, and water that's been produced.
Now, when you say these mushrooms aren't producing fruit, is that by design? Are you guys using a mushroom that doesn't fruit, or is that just the type of mushroom that would break down these hydrocarbons?
Yeah, we're actually using our favorite white commercial oyster mushroom that we grow for food because it's just so aggressive, but we're in the two projects that we, supplied the mycelium for, they never produced fruiting environment for the mushroom. So we never created the environment where the mushrooms would be fruiting. We covered it with plastic, the time of year, the temperatures in the pile. A woman was doing an experiment with some contaminated soil in Arcata, and she did it like right at the perfect time of the year last fall. And she used so much straw that the pile actually fruited, mushrooms. It's a beautiful picture, and people like that. That's so exciting. And there's nothing wrong with that, because of course the mushrooms will attract insects, and the insects will attract birds. And, the whole evolution of life is starting again, just like we were kind of, I was talking about with that bird's eye view of fungi's role in ecosystems. And so that's a beautiful process, but we're really focusing on, in the projects we did, of not leaching the piles from rain, not having any people having access to the contaminated soils, you know, and really trying to contain this environment by, you know, covering everything with plastic and opening it up to breathe and watering it when needed and stuff like that. So in those cases, we just didn't create those conditions to fruit the mushrooms, which is not what we were striving for.
Mm-hmm. If you guys did want to fruit the mushrooms, would you be able to eat them where they're, you know, they're feeding off those hydrocarbons, or would that not play a role in that?
That's a good question, Nick. You know, I've read a few articles on this, and if there was no heavy metals in the motor oil, or in, you know, which there often is, if there's like a generator or it's used motor oil or whatever, there is metals from the engine, you know, that you know, was working as the oil was in there with the, you know, with all the gears and everything. Mm-hmm. And so the interesting, you know, thing about fungi is, you know, they are full of protein and minerals, you know, contrary to what we thought, you know, 100 years ago or whatever about mushrooms. They're loaded with nutrients and vitamins and minerals. Those minerals that they bioaccumulate, just like mycorrhizal fungi will accumulate those to trade with trees, they'll also pump those up into their fruiting bodies. And so mushrooms have been looked at as a means of bioaccumulation for heavy metals and radioactive isotopes out of contaminated areas. Again, you have to create those fruiting conditions, so that's much more tricky than just growing the mycelium. So, you know, say for instance, that Orleans project, yes, there was clean diesel fuel that had soaked into the ground, but there was also a generator right there that had been leaking motor oil. You know?
Yeah.
And then what else was happening in that parking lot out there?
Yeah. Yeah, you wouldn't want that in your system.
Was there burn piles? Was there, you know, trash barrels? I don't know what happened in the last 200 years in that backyard there. So you would have to do a metals test. You would want to test the fruiting bodies themselves. And it definitely was a concern that you don't want someone walking by the pile and being like, look, oyster mushrooms. Mm-hmm. So we had signs up about what the project was, and, you know, that it was hazardous and waste.
Tying back into the landfill situation, because that's a mess if you ever look at one.
Right.
And a lot of people say that you know, that does block the natural breakdown of our trash and all these decomposing fruits and, you know, our food, and that we should just let that decompose how it would naturally and let fungus take it over and let all these natural processes occur, because that's what nature intended. That's how it's supposed to be broken down. Whereas now we're just sticking it under the ground and letting it sit there, and it's not breaking down and nothing's happening to it, as opposed to, you know, letting nature take over. Are there pushes to let fungus take over that? I mean, I don't know how you would implement that on a large scale, but it seems like it'd be way more beneficial, and, you know, especially to our land.
Right. I mean, you know, that's a big subject, you know, our trash production and our consumption in the society. And, you know, that at this point we need like 8 more planets to keep going how we're going right now.
I believe it.
So, but on a, you know, something like food waste, I mean, that's just ridiculous. You know, we should have biogas digesters. We have composting plants, you know, everybody should have a home composter, you know, and that is letting bacteria and fungi do its job instead of giant landfills that just produce massive amounts of methane, you know, where they have to have flares going. You know, I remember I had tickets to a Grateful Dead show at Shoreline that was rescheduled because the whole amphitheater is built on a giant old dump, and giant methane flares started coming out of the mountainside where the grass was, you know, where we were supposed to see the concert, you know. So yeah, our, you know, what to do with our plastic, you know, what to do with our construction waste. You know, I'm working with the local contractor that we're doing some trials on using construction waste to grow into mycelium fungal building materials. And so we really need to focus on reducing and reusing before we look at the end result of our consumption, so yeah, it's like I get calls and people are saying, I have all this plastic, I have all this plastic at my farm. I have all this plastic, left over, I have all this styrofoam. I read this article that fungus will break it down. And well, it is true. There's been a couple cool studies. People come out with, they found a fungus growing on a rubber tree in the tropics. And sure, it breaks down, natural latex rubber. Well, guess what? It'll also break down your tires on your car, and so it's like, again, just like with the microremediation, you need to shred the tire up. You need to create the perfect environment for the fungus to grow. You need to be really patient. And over time, these things will slowly break them down. But if you just take that tire that's lost its tread and you're like, wait a second, this is an amazing amount of embedded energy in this tire right here, and grinding it up and using it for a playground or for roadbed or for, is like, and that's what we need to do with styrofoam. And that's what we need to do with building waste. And that's what we need to do with plastic and glass and all these things, and that would, reduce a huge amount of landfill production. And then of course, then the big question is, why are we consuming so much junk?
Yeah. And producing so much plastic when there really isn't a need. I mean, you can use hemp for 90% of what you use plastic for. And there's really just not a need, but we're so ingrained and people don't have the patience or the time to really start investing in those ways as of now. We'll see. Right. Hopefully that'll change in the future, but
why is Amazon sending me these, bubble wrap plastic bags for one ink cartridge?
Yeah. And or like, bags in a box. That makes no sense.
What's wrong with a cardboard envelope?
Yeah,
like,
right.
Some shredded paper as a stuffing. Like, we have answers already, and fungus can play a huge role in that too. There's an amazing company that we've approached to hopefully license some of their technology from, called Ecovative Design. And they have contracts now with IKEA IKEA wants to phase out their styrofoam for all their furniture packaging. And so they're growing using agricultural waste. They're growing forms with the mycelium to hold the shredded, hemp and straw and sawdust together to replace styrofoam. And then you have your package shows up, you get out your new whatever cabinet, your IKEA cabinet, and you throw the packaging in your compost.
Oh, wow. I know, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I've heard that there's a type of fungus that also breaks down radioactive waste too, right?
Yeah, I'm not a really very good chemist, but my understanding is with metals and radioactive isotopes, they kind of fit in that same category, that they don't really change molecularly. They just move around the environment. I'm not sure what happens, in a supernova or something, what transformations take place, if you in the middle of the sun or something. But on down here on Earth, lead and cadmium and mercury, they just move around. And so they're to a mushroom, they're basically just in that category of like a mineral again. And so is the radioactive isotopes. And Paul Stamets had an article in his book, Mycelium Running, about this one mushroom, I think it was gumphus, that was bioaccumulating cesium-137 10,000 times stronger in the fruiting body than the background levels that were in the soil. So it was actually the mycelium was channeling these radioactive isotopes up into this fruiting body. So now you have a radioactive mushroom.
Oh, wow. And then what do you do with that, right? That doesn't exactly solve the issue of cleaning up the waste. It
it could help. I haven't read any articles about people implementing this for any kind of cleanup projects, but it is a concern in mushroom cultivation, where you cultivate the mushrooms and what substrates you're using and what kind of metals and toxins, heavy metals are in the substrate and can end up in the fruiting bodies. And it is a major concern, especially where you're sourcing your mushrooms from and what polluted environment they're growing in, because now we're producing all kinds of contaminants just from coal power plants and mining and in our waters and strip mining and coal burning and nuclear power plants and nuclear testing, and these things are actually showing up in the mushrooms. There was an article about 10 years ago where people started going back into the Chernobyl forests and collecting wild mushrooms, porcinis, chanterelles, and the forest is like recovering in an amazing way. I don't know if you saw Dr. Attenborough's little episode where he went back into the Chernobyl abandoned restricted zone, and there's deer and there's wolves.
Yeah, I've heard the wildlife it's recovering.
Well, so are the mushrooms, and they're full of radiation.
Yeah.
It set off a radiation Geiger counter detector in Europe at a port, a shipping container full of dried mushrooms.
Oh, wow. All the mushrooms they picked from there. Oh, man.
Yeah. So where's your food coming from? Where are your mushrooms coming from? On one hand, they're this wonderful, delicious fruiting, these fruiting bodies that are full of minerals. Well, those minerals could also be lead and cadmium and, God forbid, cesium-137.
So are a lot of, because I know a lot of people go through the forest and just forage for mushrooms, right? Is that kind of dying out where you really don't know? First off, you definitely have to pay attention to what kind of mushroom, and you'd have to know that A, this mushroom isn't toxic, but B, you have to ensure that there's no trash. And we know that there's trash in remote places in Alaska. There's no place on Earth, I would imagine, that's untouched by trash at this point.
It's so true. It's just like eating high up on the food chain, the mercury levels in tuna, the contaminated levels in crab, bottom feeders, top feeders, oysters, in the bay. It's really good to get in touch with that. I read a gentleman that did a study when Fukushima was evacuating radiation into the atmosphere, and they were flushing into the ocean, and it was entering into our atmosphere, and people were like, oh no, huge radiation clouds going to come over here. Well, it wasn't as dramatic as that, but it did start showing up in things like milk. And in this one gentleman did a study, he went from Canada to Mexico, and he was testing chanterelles for the cesium-137, and the levels were going up a little bit from Fukushima. And, we live on this one biosphere. I read this article how they can date wine pre-Chernobyl and post-Chernobyl.
Oh, wow.
Across Europe because of the radioactive isotopes, and it's like, I'm not one for big conspiracies and scares, but I was very concerned about Fukushima, and I was watching it and trying to sift through the conspiracies and people freaking out and what's reality, what's truth. And sure enough, I went on the EPA's website and I looked up allowable cesium-137 levels in milk. California is one of the largest milk producers in the US, and we had to raise our cesium allowable levels up for the milk to be certified because they were going up from.
Oh my God. How many people know that?
Yeah. And this is the EPA's website. This was Obama had to, approve this order, and of course, any mainstream, the EPA says that these are safe levels, you know what I mean? And and there's some truth to the fact that we're all exposed to small amounts of, things all the time. There's asbestos in, the gravel in my yard, in my driveway, there's asbestos in naturally occurring, there's, lead, there's mercury, there's, all kinds of stuff in the environment, and our bodies do process these things in certain ways. And, but we know also that at even minute amounts, they are seriously harmful to our health.
Yeah, the problem even with allowable amounts is you really don't want any. I mean, the goal is to try to keep all these heavy metals and toxic substances out of your body, not set a threshold where, okay, yeah, we can have this amount and it's probably not going to lead to any long-term detrimental problems. But I mean, who knows? And how much you accumulate over a lifetime can freak you out a little bit.
Yeah, if you look at a woman's, a mother's milk, in 2021, it's kind of scary. The average accumulated toxins that are in breast milk are just astronomical compared to even your grandparents or your great grandparents.
Yeah, it's frightening. It's frightening once you start looking at really what is in our food that really shouldn't be there. And especially for farms and stuff like we have throughout California. I mean, there's a lot of chemicals and the pesticides. All that leaches into your food. It doesn't just go away,
Yeah. And our population explosions of humans, our, pressure on the planet and pushing into pristine environments, and destroying natural habitats is really bringing it to home that we are on this really small planet and this biosphere, and it's all so connected. The dust from Africa, lands across the, southeast and adds nutrients, and the pollution from China blows over into Humboldt, and you're just like, this is it seems far away, but it's not.
Yeah, I mean, even just putting it in terms of fungus, those spores can travel for miles, can't they, if they catch a good breeze or find the right circumstances? I mean,
yeah, miles, thousands of miles. Yeah, and have colonized every habitable place on the planet. And if you hang out with Paul Stamets long enough, you'll come to believe they're probably flying through this space too.
So at your farm, it sounds like you're not just growing these mushrooms, but you're also doing a lot of work in the community. I know you were talking about with the hydrocarbons and the oil spill you were talking about. How did that kind of form in unison with you growing mushrooms? You kind of just had this outreach, or was that an afterthought?
Yeah, we, again, Paul Stamets being a big influence, and seeing him talk at that conference, at the Bioneers conference, and hearing about the fact that I could grow this very easy, simple to grow Pleurotus ostreatus, oyster mushroom, and that if I spilt some gasoline or some hydraulic fluid, which I've had, which any of us that, have cars and equipment and chainsaws and have spilt, chemicals on the ground, that I could take that and I could just feed it to some oyster mycelium and I could remediate that pollution. And I was just so enthralled that I didn't need a PhD, that I didn't need, a $20,000 piece of equipment, that I could just promote this in my community for people, this practical, easy grassroots solution. And that was definitely one of the inspirations to get our laboratory and get our facility going. And that's why we did kind of overbuild our lab and set ourselves up to have a culture bank of, a wide variety of fungal strains, and be able to produce food and medicinal mushrooms and do remediation and look at, creating fungal building materials and stuff like that, because it's so infinite, the potential, that I just knew that, we needed that in our community up here, that I could be a source for people wanting to do projects like that.
Now, that's something I didn't know, is that there are quite a few mushrooms that have a lot of health benefits, especially with like inflammation with, the chaga mushrooms or lion's mane. And I've kind of seen them pop up more in like coffee or tea. Are you guys growing those types as well? When you said medicinal, that kind of piqued my interest.
Yeah. We we recently just came out with a line of 3 different tinctures. We have a reishi tincture and a turkey tail tincture and a lion's mane tincture. So we're getting those out in the stores, and we have those on our website and stuff. And but just like with a lot of sort of superfoods, they're just jam packed with nutrients and minerals and beta glucans and polysaccharides. And some of them just have crazy compounds that are either very, very rare to find in any of the other foods we eat, or just singularly, they have, compounds that you just don't find anywhere else. And so just like, you can eat, something that has a little bit of vitamin C, and then you can eat something that has a ton of vitamin C, so it's the same thing with mushrooms. It's like they literally are like a superfood. And some of them are so condensed with vitamins and minerals and nutrients that it doesn't take very much to provide what your body needs for, like you mentioned, contributing to your system, your immune system, your organs, your brain, your eyesight, your skin. And there's been just wonderful research coming out, of people using these to help with all kinds of conditions and all kinds of ailments. I never like to say something's like a silver bullet in itself, but Paul Stamets' company, Fungi Perfecti, they were doing they just released a bunch of studies a few years ago with the American Cancer Society, and they were doing turkey tail trials with people that were on chemotherapy. And the trials were showing that the people that were taking the turkey tail in conjunction with the chemotherapy had less side effects from the chemotherapy, recovered faster after the chemotherapy was done, and stayed longer in remission than the folks that were taking the turkey tail with it. And so there you have just this extra tool. It's not like, oh, take turkey tail, it'll shrink your tumor. But, obviously Western medicine has a lot to offer us if you need surgery, if you need chemotherapy. But going in it alone without looking at diet, without looking at supplements and other powerful foods and nutrients that can contribute to helping your body through that process. And then not to mention on a regular basis, if you're not in a crisis, like you have, you're going through cancer treatment or something like that, but you're just looking at providing your body, like we talked about, in a very stressful world that's becoming more and more contaminated, providing your body with those essential nutrients that are found less and less in our food and in our soils.
These turkey tails, do they know why they're benefiting those chemo trials?
I forget what the compounds were in them specifically, but again, the mineral and vitamin, packed into these tiny little, polypore fungi, and these polysaccharides and these beta glucans, we know now that those feed our system. They feed our red blood cells. They feed our white blood cells. They feed the components that our immune systems and our lymphatic system needs to function. Mm-hmm. It's just like this hericium compound in the lion's mane. They broke it. They've dissected this really profound nutrients found in the lion's mane, and it feeds our body exactly what we use to grow nerves and connective tissue in our body. And it's not that this isn't also found in, other things you eat, it's just so condensed and compacted that you can make a tea or a tincture or a double extraction, out of these mushrooms, or just eat them also, that you're giving your body this exact nutrients and this exact recipe that it needs to provide your brain and your connective tissue and your nervous system with these compounds. And so
no, continue.
So they, again, not a silver bullet, but the studies that have come out so far showed that people with memory issues, people with cognitive issues, this didn't clear up all their problems then they just their memory was just amazing. They did a 3-month treatment, but what they found was as the people continued to take these lion's mane mushroom, they showed small improvements in their cognitive function, and when they stopped, their problems came right back. And so it wasn't clearing up, all the issues they had. It was just providing their body the ability to ward off and slow down the cobwebs in the brain that are going to build up in all of us. If we are lucky to live into our 80s and 90s years old, our brains just don't function that way anymore. Our nervous system and our nerves don't repair themselves as fast as we age. And then there's folks struggling with, nerve disorders. I talked to a woman who uses lion's mane for her son, and she mentioned that he had Lyme's disease. And I was like, I think that's a bacterial infection. I'm not sure that lion's mane is going to necessarily help with that. And she said, oh no, it's not for the Lyme's. It's for the Lyme's, the nerve damage the Lyme's disease has caused and the pain that he has from the nerve damage. And if he takes the lion's mane, it slows down the nerve damage and reduces his pain. And I was just blown away because I had not read that anywhere, but here was this firsthand person telling me that this helps my son. And she bought 5 bottles. And I was like,
oh, that's okay. Incredible.
Another story, I like personal stories. Of course, I have like the fungal pharmacy that shows every compound that you can extract, through alcohol and water and, each mushroom and what we think those, what we know those do in the body and stuff. So the science is there, but I like the firsthand experiences. I was at the herb store and this 2 very large gentlemen walked in full leather with giant Harley Davidson patches on their backs. And he proceeded to go in the back of Moonrise Herbs and buy all the reishi mushrooms she had. And I just couldn't help myself. I'm starting a mushroom farm, I'm like, oh, excuse me, sir. He's like 6'5", and I'm like, what are you doing with the reishi mushroom? And he goes, I have Hep C, Hep B, Hep A, and I'm supposed to be dead. And this mushroom saved my life. And the doctors all think I should be dead and they don't believe me. I started taking this mushroom and I'm still alive. And he did not want they offered him a tincture and he said, no, the tincture doesn't work. He said, I have to boil the mushroom for the tea. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I need to know more. And I raced home and I started researching. This is, 12, 13 years ago. So I didn't have the fungal pharmacy book yet. I don't even know if it was out, but lo and behold, I find this Chinese medicine doctor's website, and there is all the compounds that are extractable through hot water and all the compounds that are extractable through alcohol. And sure enough, the water soluble compounds were known to help suppress help the body fight viruses. And that's what this gentleman had infected himself with by contacting hepatitis. He was giving his immune system just enough nutrients to ward off this hepatitis and keep him alive. And he must have been, in his 60s or something. And they rode up on their Harley bikes. They were still like full on like motorcycle riders. And he definitely wasn't your average person you see in the herb store, and he had found this and he's gave me a clear, very abrupt, explanation and very frustrated that his other friends that were dead would not drink this really strange mushroom.
Well, do a lot of people know about the health benefits of mushrooms? I mean, it seems like it's not just out there in the public, at least not yet.
More and more, we saw that movie fantastic fungi come out, and that was in the theaters last winter. A lot of great books, a lot of really good scientific information. Of course, we're currently relying on a lot of studies done in Asia because the US and parts of Europe and stuff, we're just really behind the times with really analyzing and doing trials on these mushrooms and understanding what role they play. That Chinese medicine article then went on to explain that even though the water soluble compounds were what was most potent for, say, like a viral infection, the alcohol soluble compounds that extracts all kinds of minerals and other nutrients is just as important for the body too. And so now we know that double extractions doing hot water and alcohol is a really good idea in general to take, but in that moment, like the Harley guy, he knew that that's what worked for him. And he had found that, and that's what we see throughout, eons with, herbalists and natural medicine and Chinese doctors and traditional and indigenous knowledge of what plants and medicines, provide for our bodies.
Yeah, it's really incredible when you start to dig into it and actually, realize that a lot of the ailments and problems that you have can be solved through plants or through fungi or through these other remedies that, were kind of written off as like fake medicinal, just myths. But no, these plants really do have these healing effects that you can use and you can take advantage of if you know them and know how to do it.
Exactly.
Go.
And I'm not one to, diss Western medicine. If I need an MRI, I'm going to go get an MRI.
There's no plant for that right now.
If we, a huge portion of the population would be, deformed, and dead from polio if we didn't invent the polio vaccine. I'm not for a second going to be like, oh, you don't need to ever, take antibiotics, or something. If I have gangrene on my foot, I'm not just going to sit here drinking reishi tea. But I also know that, as part of the daily, nutrients that I can give to my body while we're under a lot of stress, while we have a viral pandemic, breakout, I'm going to do whatever I can to strengthen my immune system.
Yeah, and vitamins and minerals, like you were saying, that comes into play a lot in helping your body be able to prevent these diseases and viruses and ailments. And it's crazy when you learn that, most Americans especially are vitamin deficient.
Right.
Are just completely below the levels that we should have, especially with vitamin D, which I didn't even know until recently that vitamin D is actually a hormone that your body needs.
Right. And even Dr. Fauci said that can help boost your immune system, unfortunately, he just mumbled it once. It really should be on the CDC's
they should be talking about that all the time.
Because, you're talking, even if it's a 10% reduction in infection rate in a society or something, if you take vitamin D and drink reishi tea, it's like, well, that's hundreds of thousands of people on the planet, what would that reduce in the person that contacts it, transmits it, or whatever, while we wait for a vaccine or what have you. It's like, we know that, just living on Twinkies and soft drinks is not satisfying our body's nutrient needs.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to get the statistic wrong, so don't quote me on this, but I think it's something like low 90% of people who have contracted COVID were vitamin deficient. And I wouldn't
be surprised.
Yeah, of the percent that had it, if they had correct doses of vitamin D, they didn't have severe reactions to corona. That it was just a minimal case if they showed any symptoms at all, which really shows how important vitamin D is for COVID especially.
Of course. And mushrooms are just the strangest organisms, right? Like, they evolved and fungi and plants broke off on the family tree, and then eons later animals and fungi broke off. We're more related to fungi than we are to plants.
And, oh wow, I didn't know that.
Think about your digestive tract. You put food in there, and then you secrete enzymes, and then you break down the foods, and then you extract the carbohydrates and nutrients out of it. And if you look at the mycelial hyphae, it's almost like your intestines turned inside out. It's not an animal, it's not a plant, it's this really strange organism, but it produces vitamin B. You know what I mean? Which is really only produced by animals, but it's also produced by fungi and yeasts. So you're right in this like realm, especially if you're a vegetarian, especially if you're B vitamin deficient. You're getting these vitamins from eating this fungi. That being said, it's always important, since we're having a podcast on mushrooms, that people thoroughly cook mushrooms. It's a really strange phenomenon that seems to primarily be in the US, not that I'm a huge world traveler, but where we have decided to produce button mushrooms, which personally are kind of bland, and serve them raw on a salad bar, when the chitins that make up the tissue of the fruiting body are completely indigestible to your GI tract and will literally pass through your whole digestive system without being broken down. So if we're talking about the nutrients in mushrooms and we're talking about the medicinal properties of mushrooms, we should probably also emphasize to people that you need to thoroughly boil or thoroughly cook your mushrooms to get the nutrients out of them.
Is that all mushrooms? You should cook all of them? Okay.
Yes.
Definitely going to make note of that.
Yeah, totally. So strangest phenomenon to put it out raw on a salad bar. Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like they should be doing that at all.
So I haven't traveled throughout Asia, but my general understanding of people that I've met and a culture that goes back 1,000 years of collecting and recording the health benefits of reishi mushrooms and cordyceps and shiitakes and all. There's a long practice of boiling and cooking and tincturing and thoroughly cooking your mushrooms to eat.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense why they'd put something out that is not digestible. I mean, that doesn't make sense, especially where you're eating it with a salad. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. So you're wasting your money. You're not getting the nutrients and vitamins and protein, out of the mushroom. So thoroughly cook your mushrooms.
So when you are making these tinctures, is there any benefit to using those over just separating out the minerals and all the benefits from with water or with alcohol, or how are you making the tinctures?
Yeah, so we do what's called a double extraction process, where we do 190 proof. We use Humboldt Distillery's local organic ethanol, and we soak the mushrooms in the alcohol. And like I mentioned, there's water soluble compounds, and then there's alcohol soluble compounds. And then we take the mushrooms out of the alcohol and we boil them in, some reversed osmosis water. And then we add that tea basically to the alcohol extract. And then we have this double extraction. So trying to getting the best of both worlds, because there is some things that are more extracted through, each method.
So if you're just focused on trying to get the most, more minerals and more vitamins, the tincture would probably be the way to go, as opposed to just eating the mushroom, right?
Right. Because eating the mushroom or eating, myceliated, myceliated brown rice, or you see that on the market a lot now as mycelial capsules and stuff. And that's basically the vegetative part of the fungus grown on like brown rice or sorghum, and then they'll heat it, cook it, and then dehydrate it and powder it, and so that's basically like equivalent of like the tea. That's a heat extraction. The alcohol is, from what we've researched so far, a really key component for some of the, compounds you really want to get into your body. And so we felt like that's like a really great combination to be able to offer people. And of course, there's nothing wrong with cooking it. Again, that's just the heating. That's like making a tea, you know, and so you're cooking it. The problem is I can take, you know, a few pounds of lion's mane and dry it and crush it into a jar and pour alcohol over it and boil it. So I can give you a very condensed dosage of lion's mane tincture that you can take every day and you can keep, you know, have in your pocket while you travel. Whereas, you know, going to the store and paying 10 or 15 bucks a pound, it's more of a novelty thing. Like, oh, let's get some lion's mane and put it on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like taking a multivitamin where you're getting straight to the source.
Nothing wrong with it. Of course, eat a healthy diet. And of course, we love eating mushrooms. You know, some breaded fried lion's mane is at the top of my list of favorite mushrooms to eat, you know, but yeah, if I'm really wanting to boost, you know, strengthen my immune system, and there's a, you know, massive viral pandemic killing millions of people on the planet, then I think I'm just going to, dose up every day.
Yeah. Just be on the safe side. Lion's mane is really interesting because of that nootropic effect. Is that common across a lot of mushrooms, or is it really lion's mane in particular where you see those cognitive benefits?
Lion's mane just has kind of the standout these hericium compounds that have been linked to the brain and nerve and connective tissue, you know, strengthening.
Yeah, I've seen that pop up in a few, you know, different supplements, lion's mane, and they're promoting, you know, oh, it's going to help with your cognition, you're going to be more focused, your memory is going to be more on point. And I thought that was fascinating. I haven't tried it yet, but I definitely want to try some lion's mane.
Yeah, and it's nice, you know, if you can get a tincture for, you know, $15-20 that will last you a few weeks, and you can take it every day, then it's like $20 worth well spent to see if it feels right. You know? It's not this, you know, huge investment or whatever to, you know, see if it works or not. And you know, it depends what's going on with, you know, your cognitive issues, or what's, you know, what cancer or diabetes or low blood pressure or high blood pressure, you know, what are you dealing with? You know, it's like it's hard to know exactly, even when you go see a doctor. Sometimes it's a guessing game. You know, what's the underlying issues that you're having, and what mushroom or compounds are going to, you know, or vitamins or nutrients or food or diet is going to really help you, you know, with your ailment.
And so all these tinctures that you make, are you guys growing the mushrooms in-house that you use for those as well?
Yeah. We do wildcraft some of our turkey tail just because it's so prolific here, you know, natively. But we grow a little bit too. But the reishi, we grow 2 different kinds of reishi. We make an immune tonic tincture, and we do 2 different reishis. And we also do dried shiitake in that, because shiitake just has some, you know, amazing amounts of B vitamins and, you know, and other just minerals and stuff that are incredible. So we thought that was a really good kind of mix that we call the immune tonic. And then we just have the straight up lion's mane and the straight up turkey tail. Of course, you could take them all together too. It wouldn't matter. You know, these aren't like heroic herbs. You know, it's not like you're taking something and there's a load of it, or you don't want to take it for too long, or, you know, when you read on the bottle,
you're not going to overdose on these.
Yeah, and it says don't take for more than 2 weeks at a time or something, you know, or you're taking something that's a little hard on your kidneys or your liver or something, you know. These are supportive, you know, adaptogens, you know, if you don't need it, you pee it out, you know, you eliminate it, you know.
Yeah.
And so it's real supportive like that. Of course, there's your rare contraindicating, you know, thing. If somebody they're on, you know, blood pressure medication, and reishi can like lower your blood pressure a little bit, you know, or something, you know, like, you know, or you're, you know, hemophiliac or something, you know, and reishi thins your blood or something, you know. Of course, it's always good to educate yourself, you know, on what you're taking.
And so how long does it take to grow these mushrooms? I know we said for like the truffles, it can be like 15 years. Is that pretty common for fruit bearing mushrooms too?
Yeah. And well, again, the 15 years was to allow the hazelnut trees to mature.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And at that stage, you would start getting truffles. You know, truffles I think they take, you know, a year or two to grow, you know. Some of the big ones may be longer or whatever, right? You know, like that truffle they auctioned off that was 3 pounds or whatever.
Oh, wow.
In Europe a couple years ago, you know, it went for like $100,000 or so or more. Or something.
Oh, man.
Yeah. But so generally speaking, oyster mushrooms, which we grow a lot of, we can produce those within about 3 weeks. So we can, you know, the whole process takes a couple months, but the colonization of the fruiting substrate, when in our case straw, that we pasteurize and inoculate, from inoculation onto the straw to the beginning of fruiting is about 3 weeks. So we're harvesting mushrooms in about a month. Reishi, much longer. We inoculate sawdust. That takes a couple months to colonize. And then the mushrooms take about a month to grow.
And how many mushrooms are being produced? Is it a fairly consistent number, or it's different with each colony?
Different with each one, yeah. So people call it the biological efficiency, the BE, right? And it kind of goes down the list where you have oyster mushrooms again, which have some of the highest biological efficiency. So you can take 10 pounds of straw and you wet it, you know, wet straw, you know, and you can grow 10 pounds of oyster mushrooms. And so oyster mushrooms are often the introductory to a lot of people doing cultivation, and also small farms that want to set up. They're the easiest, they grow the fastest, they're also the cheapest, you know, at the grocery store, you know. But people love them. They're super popular, super nutritious, super healthy, loaded with protein and vitamins. And have been looked at in all kinds of scenarios where there's food insecurity, there's natural disasters. What else produced protein in 4 weeks? Not eggs, not fish, not chickens, maybe mealworms, if you're into eating mealworms, that you know.
Yeah.
But next to insects, it's like, that's a really big fast turnaround from straw to protein, you know, from agricultural waste to protein, you know, for people to eat. So driving, you know, huge semis into disaster zones set up to be fruiting, you know, fruiting environments, setting up tents where people could grow the mushrooms. And that is kind of, again, in places throughout Asia, South Asia, Africa, India, you'll see a lot of oyster production, because a small village can, with basic materials, and even if they have to buy the spawn, everything else can be done outdoors in a non-sterile environment to produce oyster mushrooms. And then you have things like shiitakes. You know, shiitakes have a you know, pretty high biological efficiency. And then lion's manes, kind of a little bit lower. And then reishi, even lower. And these also, you'll see reflecting almost the exact prices that you get in the store. Oysters are the cheapest, shiitakes are the next, lion's manes are more expensive, reishi is the most expensive. You know, just to use examples of things that we grow.
And so oyster mushrooms, they're the ones that have the high protein count.
Oh, most of them do. But this just as an example of something that grows that fast, that produces that much protein. Yeah.
Do they make any protein powders out of that? I don't know if you would know, because I know that they've started making like hemp protein, and that's a pretty popular plant-based protein powder. I don't know if they make any mushroom ones, but that sounds like that would be a great way to get clean protein.
Yeah. And you're seeing products, you know, starting to incorporate just ground up mushrooms in, like, you know, vegetarian patties and burgers and you know, mushroom jerkies and things, you know, so that's becoming more popular too.
I didn't even know mushroom jerky was a thing. They just dry out the mushroom?
Just as you would do with meat, you know, marinate it, and then slice it up real thin, and then bake it in the oven a little bit, and then dehydrate it. And you end up with this, whatever you want it to taste like, kind of spicy, chewy, vegan jerky.
Huh. Well, that's incredible.
Yeah. And some mushrooms lend themselves more, just like different, vegetables in your garden and different meats and things lend themselves to kind of different dishes and have different textures and, different, stand up better to, boiling or cooking or frying or baking or, pateing or what have you.
And so for someone, since we're in these COVID times, for someone looking to get, a tincture or mushroom that kind of provides the best overall, vitamin count and mineral count, what would you recommend for that person?
Yeah, the double extraction is
the way to go.
The way to go for sure. There's been some really good research, and a lot of this, is kind of cutting edge and stuff. We're finding out more and more as time, goes on, and more people do more studies and analyze the nutrients and these mushrooms. The dehydrated mycelium is a lot cheaper to produce, and so you see these mushroom powders at the store, and they're growing the mycelium, like I mentioned, on brown rice or on sorghum, and then they're baking the grain with the mycelium, and then they're grinding it and powdering it, dehydrating it and powdering it. You have a lot of, it's still a lot of brown rice. You're getting the mushroom out of there, but that's why they're cheaper, is because it's a lot easier to grow. Paul Stamets published some studies showing that some of the compounds in the mycelium were in a larger concentration than they were in the fruiting body. But there's also been some studies showing the exact opposite for other certain compounds. And so when the fungi is in this vegetative phase of reproduction and producing more and more and more mycelium and more mycelium, there's stronger, compounds that you might find in that. But then when it goes to produce the fruiting body and it develops this huge mushroom, it pumps a lot of the nutrients and minerals from the mycelium up into the fruiting body also. So there's been some kind of differencing of opinions and a lot of really interesting studies coming out of what is the most powerful medicine you can get, from these processes. What can you grow the mycelium on to enhance the nutrients in the mycelium? Because whatever it's growing on, just like your garden, is what ends up in your vegetables. It's what ends up in the mushroom. So that's like a really powerful tool too. So that's being discussed more and more. So you're seeing different farms using different techniques and different substrates, which is producing different concentrations. There was one company that was looking at growing mineral rich, I think it was selenium rich substrate, and harvesting the fruiting bodies and selling them as a selenium nutrient supplement, because it was condensing it and making it bioavailable by basically breaking it down and concentrating it up into this fruiting body. So what's the difference then if you grow something on, organic substrate? What if you grow it on, what if you add extra minerals and vitamins to the substrate?
Make it more nutrient dense.
Yeah. What if you eat the mycelium versus the fruiting body? What compounds of each mushroom is more potent for what ailment you're trying to address that maybe's in the fruiting body or maybe's more in the mycelium?
Mm-hmm.
So right now we just decided to just use fruiting bodies because I've read so much research, and it's traditional medicine and indigenous knowledge going back so long of what's in these fruiting bodies and all the nutrients that's condensed and pulled out of the substrate and forced up into this reproductive, giant mushroom. And so, we might start incorporating myceliums, over time, but there's no way to extract out the sorghum or the brown rice. And so inevitably you're eating a lot of brown rice, you know, so the dosages on those bottles, take a teaspoon a day, you know, might not give you the best bang for your buck of the compounds you're trying to get, you know. So I'm still kind of waiting for more research to come out. But in the meantime, we feel most confident of using fruiting bodies for our extraction, the mushrooms themselves.
And are there, I don't want to say adverse side effects, but any repercussions from using the brown rice? Because I know that, or I've heard that, you know, because brown rice still has the husk, that it's actually harder for some people to digest and can lead to some, you know, higher counts of inflammation and some other gastrointestinal issues. I don't know if that's a common occurrence or if that's just for a small subset of the population, but I've heard that kind of floats around a little bit out there.
If that was something you were avoiding, was more starches, you know, in your diet, or brown rice wasn't on your diet, or sorghum, you know, obviously they pick brown rice over, you know, wheat or something that has gluten in it, you know, that would lower more of the population's, you know, desire to eat it, or if somebody had, you know, celiacs or something and they couldn't eat gluten. You know, so that's why they use things like sorghum and brown rice to grow the mycelium on. And that's why when you look on the back of the bottle, it says grown on, you know, myceliated brown rice, you know. Well, we grow mycelium on grain all day, you know, and it's like, yes, the mycelium starts breaking down the starches and growing more and more mycelium, but it's still predominantly grain. That's the bag. It's like, it's converting it, you know, but we know when they grow a fruiting body, it's just 100% mushroom.
Yeah.
There's no way for me to take the mycelium out of the brown rice.
Wow. All right. Well, we just did an hour and a half. I don't want to take any more of your time, but thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. I really enjoyed that. I feel like I learned a lot too.
And I know originally you reached out to the Humboldt Bay Mycological Society, which I'm, you know, a member of, and also help with some of their events and you know, workshops and mushroom hikes and stuff. But just to give them a plug, you know, since that was how we met.
Yeah.
They're just an incredible local organization in Humboldt County here. It's I think $15 to join. That gets you access to an early entry to the fair once we have fairs again, which are held at the Arcata Community Center in November, the weekend after Thanksgiving, I believe, or right around there, mid-November. Wonderful event for those of you who haven't been. Hundreds and hundreds of mushrooms from all over this Humboldt and the surrounding couple counties. Just in a bonanza of like walking through a wildflower show or something. Of mushrooms that I've been in the woods, you know, up here for 20 plus years, and mushrooms I still haven't seen, because when you send out 20, 30 people just to collect mushrooms for the fair, you're going to end up covering more topography than I could ever cover in 20 years, you know? And so it's just brilliant. And we have this incredible Goldilocks zone right here in Humboldt County between the ecological diversity we have, the elevation, the habitat. We have sometimes our mushroom fair breaks records of species collected on the West Coast. It's not that Washington, Oregon, they do have more mushrooms than we have, but in that 1 week, when you have a mushroom fair, you're hoping that you can collect as many mushrooms as possible for people to see. Well, it's very hard over months, because the mushrooms don't last. So it has to be mushrooms collected in the last 3 days for that mushroom fair. Well, because of that Goldilocks zone, because we have such an incredibly diverse climate here, this is a wonderful, just, you know, fairyland of mushrooms in Humboldt County for people to see. They also do hikes. I led a couple hikes this fall, identification hikes. They have meetings in the fall, winter, and spring when there's not a pandemic that members can go to. They're actually open to the public, but the membership gives you access to the emails and the newsletter. And they have presentations. You can bring mushrooms to get ID'd, and just a great, wonderful group to get involved with if you're interested in.
Yeah, I was gonna say they have a bunch of seminars too where they'll like teach you about these different mushrooms and how to collect them and how to grow different types and stuff too, right?
Exactly. So I help with their Facebook page. You can check out my Facebook page, Fungi Farm Facebook page, and Instagram. They also now have an Instagram page and Facebook page, and then their website has the sign up for to become a member on there too. And some of the old workshops and videos we did, they're now up on the Facebook page too.
Oh, fantastic. I hope people take advantage of that.
Totally. And when we're not in a pandemic, we usually do workshops and demonstrations at the mushroom fair on log mushroom cultivation and oyster kit growing. And we'll give talks about our microremediation project and how people can, clean up polluted water and soil and stuff. And we do a lot of lectures like at the universities and at local businesses in town and stuff too. So, people are always welcome to get on our email list. We always post on Facebook too and Instagram.
Oh, that's fantastic. Hopefully COVID ends soon then, so people can start going to those.
Yeah, we were trying to think maybe doing like a live cooking class or something, and maybe sometime this spring or something on cooking with mushrooms, because that's part of demystifying, incorporating these things in your diet. Is what do I do with this really weird? People cook it into a mushy pile. People, people get grossed out, and it's like, I like to equate it to vegetables. Like if you boiled lettuce, it would
not going to be good. Yeah.
It's the same with like seaweed. I used to teach seaweed harvesting and seaweed processing classes. Some seaweeds you can pickle, some seaweeds you can cook, some seaweeds you can toast. If you don't know, and you try to just chew on nori, it tastes like a plastic bag, because people don't know all the nori they eat is toasted, and once you toast it, it crumbles in your mouth. And it's the same with mushrooms. If you don't know how to cook this kind of mushroom or that kind of mushroom, it can really go bad.
Sideways pretty quick.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. And once you make it taste good, people flock towards it.
Yeah. So now I have all these friends where it's like, oh, my wife doesn't like mushrooms, but she likes them when you cook them,
Oh, man.
So it's just like, well, it's just the technique.
Yeah.
Make it exciting.
Come to the class. We'll show you how to cook them.
Exactly.
Oh, that's cool.
So if we don't do it online, we'll try to do it in person in the fall or something.
Okay, fantastic. Well, people have that to look forward to.
Great, Nick. Well, thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thank you. Really, I had a great time talking with you.
Awesome.